Hi, everybody. So this is kind of embarrassing because we were brought together by Amy Chu, who's not here.
She's probably fighting the crowds. Come on, get real. She's going like this.
So many of you, but there's so many of you here in the room, we can't disappoint you, so we figured we'd just start talking. That's always dangerous. So
women never have a problem talking, right?
Never have a problem talking. So we're going to just start by introducing those of us who are here. Sheena, don't you go. My name is Karen Green. I'm the curator for comics and cartoons at Columbia University. I started the graphic novels collection there in 2005 and started comics archives there in 2010 with the acquisition of Chris Claremont's archives. The graphic novels collection went from 3 graphic novels in 2005 to about 14,000 titles in 15 different languages today. Yeah! Right? And our archive started with the gift of Chris Claremont's papers and includes Wendy Peeney's papers, ElfQuest and Beyond, Al Jaffe's papers, Howard Cruz's papers, the archives of Kitchen Sink Press, massive political cartoon collections, all sorts of fun stuff. So if you're interested in comics history, come on by. I've got stuff to say about women in comics, but I'm going to let my fellow people who showed up introduce
fellow
themselves.
Creators.
I'm not a creator, so I'm not a fellow
How do
creator.
you get this out?
I just pulled it.
Pull it.
Just pull it from there.
Okay.
You push from the bottom, pull the mic flag.
I know. Oh, they know I'm clumsy too.
Hey! You all know each other now, right?
Yeah, we're starting.
Oh my God, this
We were
is
getting
huge.
acquainted, man.
I'm like trying to text, but I'm trying to walk, and I'm like, okay, this is not gonna
We
work.
gotta
Come
get
over here,
there.
your mic's over here,
Okay,
Amy.
okay. Sorry.
Should I introduce myself and just like?
We were just
take
starting by
everything?
introducing ourselves.
Okay, good.
Okay. No, don't worry.
I'm not so dyslexic too. I'm like, oh, I got plenty of time. I'm like, oh wait, we're now on the other side.
Oh, right, because Artist Alley was
Yeah,
closer
I
last year.
literally had a what do you call it? Yeah.
Brain fugue.
Let's.
Yeah, a brain fugue where I'm like,
A fidget
I got plenty
brain,
of time,
okay.
you know? I'm like, all right. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Janice Chang. I've been a comic letterer for 4 decades. I started at Neil Adams Studio, and my mentors there were Neil Adams, Larry Hama, and Ralph Reese. So basically, Ralph and Larry taught me the traditional method of hand lettering. And from there, I went to the Marvel Bullpen, where Danny Presby was my mentor. And I learned, production values and such. But as I was saying to Anthony, my new friend here from SCAD, newly graduated, I said it was in the mid-'70s, and women were either muses or handmaidens. And I said, I don't think so. Because a women's movement was going on. It's like, guys, come up to the times. So I left to do community labor organizing, political organizing. And then I came back when I had my son. So during those 5 years, meeting real people, because up to then I was just in school, an art student, I gained a lot of wisdom and understanding of we all have strengths, no matter what walk of life you come from. From your life experience, you have wisdom. If you have the humility to approach everyone like that, we're all special, and we need to be united. So when I went back, luckily, I found Louise Simonson. I Hail Married so many times there was a woman editor. So she relaunched me, and from there I basically worked up to like 2000 with Marvel. But I freelanced all over the place. This is where a woman thing comes in. At the time, the editor-in-chief was giving contracts, to colorists and letterers. Every time my editor would approach, she would say, "She's not good enough." I said, "Okay, thank you for the freedom card. I'm going everywhere and anywhere." So every major company I've worked with, every small company. So all you have to do is Google me, and you can find my database.
Yeah.
So the best revenge is success, right?
Yeah, here, here.
So right now, thank you. So when the transition from handwriting to digital, somebody plagiarized my work in a big way.
Oh.
And then internal lettering departments were created in DC and Marvel. So as a freelancer, it was like, okay, is this a time to reinvent myself? So, what was interesting was the time off was really great. I got to read more philosophy. I got to read. I got to take art classes that I wanted to take. I learned how to garden and all these things that enriches your life. Because when you're on a deadline for print, that's all you do. It's like right now I'm back on 70 hours a week. And I work in 4 time zones. Australia, Western Europe, East Coast, West Coast. There's some, I just pulled an 18-hour day recently. Wow. And then in March, there were 10 days where night was day and day was night. But, being a pro, I had to gauge myself. So I willingly do it because I think in these difficult times, we need creativity to build hope. That's our job. This is not an ego thing. We work in teams. And I like to say, when you see a book, you see a credit line of 5 people's names. But behind us, there's 30, 50 people. We have our digital department, production department. We have our proofreaders. We would look horrible if we didn't have our proofreaders. It'd be like trailing toilet paper. So, I give credits to everybody who lifts us up, on the credit line. Maybe I should stop talking. You should talk.
This is great.
So anyway, in that period of time, it goes back to our culture. In Chinese, my name, Chang, means a general in the army. And that's what I was taught and raised. My mom said, you never follow, you lead. So I was reading a book about gardening, and they said, in the general's active years, they go on their missions to expand the territories, the borders of China. But in their older years, when they come back to camp and they stay in town while the younger people go out, to the front lines, they engage in calligraphy, more refined arts like calligraphy, gardening, painting. So I said, okay, maybe it's not like the straight line in the old days. Maybe I have to garden now. Maybe I have to learn my calligraphy. Maybe I have to study my philosophy to, shore myself up, my compass, straighten it out, and come back out and fight. So I was lucky that I was able to work with manga companies like Del Rey and Tokyo Pop, because a lot of my friends, from Marvel branched out as, trends developed. And the great thing about manga, more women and young girls came to comic reading. The first manga I let us say, oh, I wish I had this when I was young. Right now I'm lettering DC superhero girls, the graphic novels, and and the digital comics. And I said to our president, maybe it was rude. I met Diana at a party. I said, yeah, hello, I'm the letterer of DC superhero girls. She goes, thank you for your great work. And I said, oh, I wish I had it when I was younger. Then I would have ran a corporation instead of living. But the bottom line, I tell all creators and young people especially, you have a dream, you have reality. The path is the point between the two. Keep your feet on the road, but never stop looking at the sky. And make sure you move forward. So, it's like, I was telling a good friend, I said, I was lettering like 60, 70 hours a day. By the time I came back when I was 25, by the time I was 28, I was lettering. I said, hey, if I keep at this can become something. So, when I was in San Diego, I was rude again. And I was telling my friends, I'll never get an Eisner unless they create a special category for me. The greatest Asian American woman comic letter in America. And I said, if you don't give it to me while I'm alive, my family has standing orders not to show up, not to accept. It's too late. It's too late. So thank you for showing up. I feel that's my reward. Nice. In the contribution. I should stop, right? You should go. But it's like, our role in culture to create hope, to have people dream of a better reality and to make it a realization. That's our job as cultural warriors. I've been really lucky to work closely with Stan Lee on, I hand letter the daily strips that you see distributed by King Features in the newspaper, and the full Sunday page, the color one. So it really blew my mind when they asked me to come take over. And I told this to Stan, in the old days with hand lettering, nobody wanted the strips. It was like the family fruitcake. It's like, oh, you hold it. No, you hold it. But the bottom line, that's the only thing at this point that's being paid for hand lettering. So I have the fruitcake now. But what it brought me was to work with Joe Sinnott. And I said, holy moly, I'm with the iconic creators, the legacy creators of Spider-Man. So they're so generous encouraging me. Because during the fallow years when I was out of the industry, you know, it was like you had to believe in yourself. And I say to everybody, you have to know your self-worth. Don't let anybody take that away from you. Because that's what you protect, you know, and that will bring you through good years and lean years. It'll keep you level during the boom years, and it'll keep you level when nobody wants to know your name. You know, no one would answer your phone calls. But, you know, I figured out, you know, these guys call each other to go to lunch. I'm calling during that lunch hour. And then they'll pick up the phone, it's like, oh, it's you.
Yeah, take notes. Take notes.
Take notes.
Right.
These are survival
Nugget
nuggets.
right there.
Right. Did we already go through anybody
we
else?
haven't
No,
heard
you
Sheena
just,
yet.
Oh,
I'm gonna
Sheena.
hit the mic there.
Sheena, do
Okay, you go.
Hi. Well,
Thank
such a wonderful turnout for women in comics.
Oh, wait, guys.
Yeah.
All right, a little louder because apparently this room is full. I couldn't get in. They were like, no, honey, you gotta wait in line. And I'm like, really?
I'm on the panel.
I'm on the panel. Where's the, you know, anyway. So let's hear it a little louder to make
Yeah.
people jealous.
Yes, I am very excited to be up here with these wonderful, amazing, talented women. It's an honor. So for me, I started studying comics in 2007 when I was working on my PhD at Howard University. So I wrote 160 pages on the Boondocks comic strips. So you can go to grad school and get a PhD and study comics, and that's pretty awesome, right? But when I was studying comics in 2007, from an academic perspective, it was kind of like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Like, this is not like academic enough. Now it's kind of like a sort of like a cultural explosion in academia with a lot more people studying comics, and this is actually like a thing, and it's accepted. But
More legit.
Yeah, it's more legit. And when I was studying it, I was like a pariah. But you know, at that time, I was reading the Boondocks comic strip. I know most of you are probably familiar with the animated television show, but it actually was a really, really awesome comic strip before it was the sexist, homophobic show that it became.
Don't hold back.
And so I actually wasn't a comic book reader before that. I was reading the Boondocks. I liked it. It was political. It was witty. It spoke to me. You know, it was current and relevant. And so I think my story is more of being a woman and like walking into the comic book store for the first time and like not knowing what questions to ask and not knowing where to start and asking questions and people looking at me like, what do you mean? What kind of question is that? And so since then, over the last 10 years, I've been continuing to study comics from an academic perspective, more of a historical perspective, which is why I was so excited to be on this panel to really talk about some of the women, Black women that I study in my work. My first book was Black Comics: Politics of Race and Representation, which actually won me an Eisner Award.
Yeah.
I didn't know what an Eisner Award was when I wrote the book. I was just writing the book because it was important, and I thought it was important to document Black comic culture and Black comic history. Recently, I am the editorial author of the book Encyclopedia of Black Comics, where I made a concerted effort to include a number of Black women in the book, because a lot of times I think sometimes if Black women are not writing for like DC or Marvel, it's like, where are they? What are they doing? But they're here. They've been working in this field for years and years and years. They're doing awesome work. They have their own fan base. And so a lot of them are right here in this book, Encyclopedia of Black Comics, and hopefully I get to name drop some of them throughout the course of this panel.
Spike Trotman.
Spike Trotman.
I just want to respond to Sheena's point about not reading comics and not knowing what to read. So I have a fairly conventional comics reading background myself. But in the 80s, I discovered heavy metal because I had a subscription to National Lampoon, and they had ads in the back of National Lampoon, and I'm like, oh, heavy metal, that sounds interesting. So I ordered an issue, and I'm like, whoa, this is amazing, because I discovered Mobius, and anyway. I was telling my comics history to somebody, and I said, to some big guy in comics, and I said I had the subscription to Heavy Metal, and he said, really? He said, isn't that kind of a lad magazine?
A lad magazine.
And I said, I don't know. And it's true that when I went back and I looked, because I bought all the old Beck issues for my library, when I went back and I looked, like every cover has a naked space babe on it. And I went, oh, that's what I can see where maybe that would be the case. And then related to that, later on, I was being interviewed for this issue of Comic Bus, which was talking to all these comics folks, and Heavy Metal came up again. And I said that my favorite comic in Heavy Metal was Ranks or Rocks by Liberatore and Tamburini, which is, do people know Ranks or Rocks?
Yep.
How many people know Ranks or Rocks? Oh, at least 6.
I think it's 10.
So Ranks or Rocks is this android in a post-apocalyptic world who has a 13-year-old junkie girlfriend named Lubna. And it's just insanely beautiful. It looks like the whole thing is airbrushed, and it's gorgeous. And this guy who was interviewing me said, really? You liked Ranks or Rocks? That doesn't seem like the sort of comic that he's like, how would you defend liking that comic to other women? I'm like, well, I didn't know I had to defend liking that comic to other women, but I liked it. I mean, I guess because there's a 13-year-old junkie girlfriend who's having sex with this android who looks kind of like Bruce Willis in his prime, with like little round glasses. It's gorgeous. Just Google Ranks or Rocks, Ranzerox, and you'll see it's absolutely gorgeous. And I just, because it was beautiful, it's like I just responded to the art. It never occurred to me that I needed to read gendered comics that were appropriate for women. I mean, I don't know where that, have any of you ever had that experience where like you say you like something, it's like women aren't supposed to like superheroes, and of course here we have a woman writing superheroes. Yeah. Women aren't supposed to like, I don't know, westerns. I mean, we're readers.
We like a good story.
We like a good story.
You like what you like. Yeah.
You like what you like.
Well, part of the let me I should introduce myself, right? Yeah. Well, like Janice was introduced, her last name means general. So my parents finally told me what my last name meant, and Chu. My name is Amy Chu, and Chu apparently means slow. Oh, awesome! I thought it was going to be something like, something fighting or cool, inspiring. They said, no, it's great. It's Chu, like in a very slow, kind of gentle, like a cloud. I'm like, oh, great. But now you will remember my name, and you'll think that I'm slow, maybe I'm a little more laid back, right? I am a comic book writer. I currently write Red Sonja. Is anyone reading Red Sonja now? Yeah. There's a Red Sonja panel tomorrow. I'll be on with Larry. Are you?
No.
You're
I'm on it. I'm the letter of
Red
Sonja, the original series.
Janice letters a lot.
Everything.
Of my, yeah, because we Asian sisters have to look out for each other. Women too.
She pulled me on 3 panels this New York Comic Con that breaks all records of 40 years. I've only done 3 panels.
Which is ridiculous. This is about,
like
sisterhood. Yes, sisterhood, but recognition for decades of what you put into, like practically any comic you pick up has been lettered by Janice at one point.
Like young readers, you name it, whatever. That's why it's ridiculous.
Smurfs. That's
24 graphic novels and 4 anthologies.
Right.
Wow.
So
That's
we will
mine.
be on the Red Sonja panel tomorrow. I don't remember now. My brain is.
It's like 11 to 12.
Yeah. And it'll be me. It'll be Gail Simone. It'll be Louise Simonson.
Yay, Louise.
Yeah.
And Larry Hama.
Larry Hama, and we'll have stories about Larry too. Larry Hama of G.I. Joe fame. Fantastic.
Part in the Warriors.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, what?
He had a bit part in the Warriors.
Oh, he did?
Yeah,
He
he's
did?
one of the gang
He was
members.
an actor.
He was a
also.
gang member? Okay, this is an aside.
Yeah.
All right. We'll talk about more of that later.
That's right.
Okay, back to me. Yeah, so Red Sonja, Poison Ivy. Anyone read Poison Ivy?
Woo!
Yeah.
I lettered it. She pulled me on. What happened was I have no ins about new projects, even though I've worked with companies a long time. So I'm reading CBR like everybody else is like, oh, Amy's like doing a new Amy Chu, Poison Ivy miniseries. So I stalked Jim Lee at San Diego.
Oh, yeah.
I find him online at Starbucks. I was like, hey, Jim, because I worked with Wildstorm on the manga, CMX. And I said, oh, I saw that, Amy's writing, Poison Ivy, and we're all on this diversity jag, right? I said, am I not diverse? So I said, I don't know who's editing it, but like bingo, my former Archie editor, Paul Kaminsky, is editing it. So they asked me, I visit the office, and then it's like, okay, come listen. I said, okay.
That is a whole nother panel about how to break it. I don't want any letters coming up to me after this panel, by the way, because you're taking away.
You got it covered.
Yeah, I got it covered. But yeah, this is the thing about being women in this business. You got to be aggressive. And I'll finish my story, but I want to talk a little bit more about the Janice thing, where she basically said, oh yeah, she talked. So I basically told Paul, yeah, so Janice talked to Jim Lee already. And that is the truth. She did talk to Jim Lee already. So he's like, okay, she's got the job. I didn't say what they said, but...
No, he said it sounded cool to him, but he doesn't know, because it's protocol. The editor's handling the creative team, and he gets to call the shots.
Right, and Paul's not going to be like, oh, well, so what exactly did Jim say? I'm like, no, Jim, they already talked. They already talked, trust me.
Paul and I were together in Archie for like 4 years. It's not like we don't know each other.
No. So, yeah, Poison Ivy, Red Sonja, currently, and we just announced Deja Thor's Princess of Mars, so that's going to be really exciting. Do you need a lettering job?
Sure. I'll team up with you anytime. I love your writing.
Thank you.
Because, letters, basically, I have a dream job, as I was saying to Anthony. I get to look at the art. I'm reading all day long. I'm reading the art directions. I'm reading, the dialogue and balloons and sound effects. I'm reading how it falls within the art. So yeah, there's a lot of reading comprehension going on.
So I'm going to talk because we all know each other, we're all friends, but part of the purpose of getting us all together, originally I was thinking, okay, this is what happened to me. I got into comics by accident. I had no idea there was such a long history of women in comics. Nobody ever told me. I'm sure a lot of you don't know, except this is why we have two scholars up here who actually know their stuff. I'm going to talk about stuff. At some point, you're going to have to correct me, okay? Because I'm more on the passionate activist, with Janice about this. Because when I got into comics, 2011, okay, I was actually trying to help my friend get into comics. I had no idea. If I had listened to what everyone was telling me, well, women don't really do comics, women don't read comics, women, you get this idea that, it's a new thing, when in fact women have been part of comics. And when I say comics, I'm talking about the universe of comics. Let's keep an open mind here. We're not just talking superhero comics. Comics is about manga, it's about comic strips, it's about visual storytelling, it's about sequential art. Women have been part of that world for 100 years now. So, just forget about this. Yes, some of it, quite a lot of it is male dominated, but less so in different parts. And part of my thinking is that we need to talk about that, recognize that, not to give you a history lesson, but to walk out and say, we belong in this world, and we've changed quite a lot of it, going forward. And to recognize that and to share some of the stories. This is why I love Janice, because I had no idea. I actually knew her sister from before. Another story. Yeah, we had no idea.
Art organizer.
I get this all the time. People in the convention are like, what do you do? Are you in comics? I'm like, well, okay, that's another long story. But 2011, I was trying to help a female friend of mine, a girlfriend of mine, do comics. And I was like, okay, I can help you do all the other stuff. You write what you write, and I'll help you publish it, because I have a business background. And she was like, well, why don't you take this writing class so you can understand how the creative people work. I'm like, why not? I'll do that. I have nothing else to do right now. I've got 2 kids crawling all over me. I've got like, I got like business. I write back in 2011. This is Amy Chu, slow Amy Chu. Back in 2011, I'm writing business plans and doing stuff in the biotech industry. And I'm being totally candid here. This is not PR. I probably should not be talking about this part. 2011, and I signed up for an online writing class. And I'm like, it's like what, I don't know, a handful, like 1 hour online, so I could understand. Because I didn't know much about comics. I certainly didn't have any idea that there were a long history of women in it. So I signed on to this class, and presto, it's like the amazing technology, right, where it's kind of like a mega Skype. You see all the other students, and there's like 12 students and me, and they're all dudes. And they're all dudes, and they already started talking before the class started. I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about. Okay, so it's like, wow, okay. And I'm Wikipediaing everything. Okay, this is 2011, and it was a revelation because there was never any over. These are great guys. I don't want to malign any of them. They were terrific guys. But as an entity, and can you imagine being the only person in a group where you don't really belong? It's very intimidating. I could have quit that day. Okay, but then you get into this kind of like, oh, this the very subtle things like, oh, so why are you taking this class? And like, oh, can you really write superhero? You know, do women really belong in comics, kind of thing.
Right.
The question came up, and some of you may have heard this before. One of the assignments was to write a superhero, and everyone was supposed to choose a superhero. I'm like, well, what should I choose? And then somebody said, well, wouldn't it be funny if she wrote Deadpool? And I'm like, well, what's so funny about that? You know, they're like they think it's like kind of a cute thing. Oh, yeah. Well, maybe she should write Squirrel Girl. I'm like, what? I mean, I'm not opposed to writing Squirrel Girl. I'll be honest, I had to look up Squirrel Girl. But this was 2011. This is a different name. Oh, okay, this is much better. You can see me now. This is, you know, Amy Chu, 2017. Now I know everybody because I had to. Because 2011, these dudes are telling me, well, wouldn't it be funny if I wrote Deadpool? So I'm like, I'm going to write Deadpool just to show you that women can write Deadpool. It's ridiculous, right? So I did. I wrote Deadpool 5 years later. I got a Deadpool story. Thank you. So my entire career has been built on just
A challenge.
a challenge. Yeah, I was going to say vindictiveness, that's not right. But it is to show that women can do this if we want to. And we have a place in the industry for this. And during this time, between 2011 and now, I have learned so much. I have Ramona Fraden. Who knows Ramona Fraden? Right? She's still active. She is still doing shows. She's 90 years old.
91 now.
91. She co-created Metamorpho.
Oh,
She's done Aquaman. She's done, okay, now this is when I call in some actual scholars.
She's done everybody.
She's done everybody, yeah.
And then she did Brenda
Starr.
Brenda Starr.
That's right, she took over Brenda Starr from Dale
Yeah.
Messick. She's
Yeah.
done Batgirl. She's done, you name it. And she will table.
She will table. You'll see her. I saw her in San Diego. I'm like, oh my God. You know, and she's tabling by herself. And I'm like, wow.
Tabling by herself.
I
She's
want
selling
to be her. I
Beautiful
want
little
to.
sketches for $25.
I bought a bunch of Brenda Starr pages from her. I want to be her when I'm that old because, you know, she's still going at it. She's still drawing. She's doing amazing stuff. And a lot of people don't know who she is. So I thought, okay, you know what? We need to provide some context to this. And we've always been here in different forms, as letterers, colorists, as pencilers, as writers. And so that's a little bit of my story. That really is why I'm like, okay, you know what? I can't quit comics now because I feel like I need to represent.
It's true. I would just like to say I was actually co-producer on a documentary called She Makes Comics, which is about women in comics as creators. I'm one of the,
I'm in it.
yeah, all the cool people are in it. Joyce Farmer's in it, Wendy Peeney's in it. Trina, I think they couldn't get to do it, but it's going to be available. Is she in it?
I think she's in it. Who's seen this documentary?
I've seen it.
I can't believe you have not seen this documentary.
But no, it wasn't really accessible. But now it's going to be released on Netflix and Amazon Prime next week.
Okay, make sure you watch it. This really should be a promo for that. If I had all, you know, I would have had a whole thing for you guys. As it is, I actually had some images to show, and I left my charger at home, so I'm sorry.
We'll have to have another panel.
Another panel. And by the way, if you have questions, please go ahead and start asking now.
I think one of the things I'm learning, because I'm writing Superb, which is a new comic book by Lion Forge in the Catalyst Prime universe, which Amy's writing a title as well. I think one of the things I'm learning as a woman, you have to have thick skin. I think thicker skin than a man would have to have, because there are some kind of, you know, it's a male-dominated industry, and to really break in and be in like the writer's room with a room full of men, you know, you have to fight a little bit harder to be heard. You have to fight a little bit hard to not kind of silence yourself and to speak up. And so I think you just gotta keep on going, right? If this is something you believe in and something you want to be in this comics world as a writer, illustrator, creator. And I think that a lot of women have found spaces, self-publishing and webcomics and things like that, and they have really large followings, outside of the confines of publishing companies that kind of control some of the material. So I think that, the internet, of course, has been a really great place for women to find each other and to support each other and talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so piggybacking off of that, it's true. If you look at the numbers, the sales numbers for something like Saga, for example. How many of you read Saga, right?
Everybody reads Saga.
Everybody reads Saga. There is no award ceremony you can go where Saga does not get an award. Those numbers, those sales numbers are largely driven by new readers and mostly female readers. Comic book shops, thank God for Saga, okay? So when we're talking about diversity, let's look at the true numbers. Let's look outside the narrow band of superhero.
Yeah, you're right. Because when you look at the
woman artist.
Yes.
Yeah, when you look at the history of comics, in the 60s, female readership was 55%. It was slightly more than male readership. But then, we got stuck on kind of this superhero genre, and kind of the female readership kind of dropped off a little bit as far as the superhero genre is concerned. But there's, like Amy was saying, there's a vast world of comics outside of kind of the superhero movies and comics. I think a lot of people get pissed off at me too because I'm not really into the superheroes that much. I'm into.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
I think they get pissed off at me. Right?
I know. I know people are gonna be pissed off at me after this too.
Whatever.
But,
I'm into the political comic books, the historical comic books, things like Afrocentric by Jewel Smith. That's kind of like the feminist version of the Boondocks. I wrote a piece on that for the Huffington Post about how that's the feminist version of the Boondocks. And so those sorts of things really speak to me, and people get really pissed off at me when I'm like, I don't really know the latest superhero. But there's a vast world of comics that women can kind of participate in, and I think women are interested in things other than just superheroes.
right. I mean, historically, if we go back, and then again, this is not a history lesson. You can correct me, but in terms of female readership, what happened was, girls and women always did read comics and were part of comics, but when there was a shift towards superhero comics have become synonymous with comics. There's a shift in the genre, not the medium. Now you'd be hard pressed to find, okay, is there a category? Walk into Barnes & Noble, you see romance, you see horror, you see sci-fi. You walk in a comic book store, it's not organized like that. Something changed, and again, I used to know all this stuff because I got kind of fascinated by this change, and that has changed some of the readership and the dominance of the creators who get interested. Creators make comics because a lot of them are fans first, and if you're not a fan, you don't really understand. I'm in it by accident. Now look at me, I'm talking about all this stuff. But
Well, there are also genres that were geared for women. There was the teen comic, Archie, the most long-lived version, but Patsy Kelly.
yeah, did you know that Archie comics outsell almost every title?
Yeah, I'm on Riverdale.
How many?
And is there any comics that?
I grew up reading Archies. I was a huge Archie fan. My orthodontist had stacks and stacks of Archies, and I would stay after my appointments and just read Archies for hours and hours. But of course, then there were also romance comics, and romance comics were killed by women's liberation, essentially. You see the shift in the way that romance comics are written as you get into the early 70s.
Feminists destroying everything again.
Yeah. But what's interesting is that you had these genres that women were kind of pushed towards, even though women traditionally read broadly, but there were ones that were more geared for them to read, and as those faded away, women just started reading other genres, but it wasn't as easy, I think, to quantify or identify this woman readership, because you didn't have how many people are reading true romance, and how many people are reading modern love, and how many people are reading whatever.
And it wasn't just the U.S., also the UK, right? There's quite a lot of female comics.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. All books that come out of America are translated from around the world. So what we decide is we'll trend around the globe.
Yeah, but some of that stuff trends over here as well.
Which
You
is
know,
nice,
you're talking
right?
about the manga revolution and, you know,
Yeah.
me reading all
What a
those
relief.
French cartoonists in the 80s.
So we got two practitioners up here and two really eminent scholars. I want to open up to your questions. You are a scholar. I call you a scholar. I consider you a scholar. You are a scholar.
I'm a lucky fangirl.
Yeah, your fangirl that really made good. I put her, by the way, I put her in a Red Sonja comic. Does anyone remember when they're going to the Columbia Library, the library scene? Okay. All right, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah.
So, hi,
Hi.
I'm Kimmy.
You can stand up.
Where are you?
See
Where
you.
are you?
You want to stand up?
Yeah.
She's sparkly. I like that.
Thank you. So, my name's Kimmy, and I really want to be a writer one day. I've already been published by like 2 indie publishers, so that's exciting. My biggest problem is like, I feel like since I am a woman, no one takes me seriously. Like, every time I walk into a comic book store, it's like, oh, are you looking for your boyfriend? And I'm just like, I had to drag him to see Wonder Woman. So, like,
You gotta
I've
go
been
to different
comics
comic
now.
book stores.
So, like, do you have any advice on to, like, how to be taken more seriously?
We're getting some time afterward.
You know,
No, go ahead.
basically, you know, it's like I was fortunate in my family. My dad and my brother were very supportive of my creativity. So men were good, you know. So when I came in the industry, it's like I'm scratching my head. It's like, what's their problem? So you know what I learned as a minority, just in the general population and in our industry, is like you stand your ground. If somebody pushes you, it's like, I don't think so. And I never let anybody bait me into a fight or say something I have to retract. That's something you have to censor yourself. You know, you have like, I have like tertiary thought balloons. And it usually ends with F you. You know, so
You're
it's
lettering in your head.
Yeah.
I love it.
Let's do the evil font there, you know. But, you know, it's like the more struggles you have, the more you understand how to deal with it. Just don't back off, or just don't like get thrown off. It's like, yeah, let me think about this. And then, as she suggested, find a better comic shop than the jerks who want to take your money but not give you
Well,
respect.
part of it, yeah, I would say also part of it is surrounding yourself with a support system, because that's never going to go away. Okay, first of all, there will be always, even if people are taking you seriously, you may not perceive that way. There isn't a whole lot to say. Okay, well, I mean, short of changing your gender, sometimes, you know, it's like you are who you are.
Guys bully guys.
Yeah, but it's because I've been in the writing room where I'm the only woman. You know, these things are going to come up. I've been in comic shops where people are like, "Oh, I'm like, no, I actually wrote this book." You know? You got to deal with that. You just have to deal with it. But then my advice to you is you get tactical. Okay, like when I realized I was the only woman on the email list for the meeting for the writers' room. You know, what do? I made sure I emailed the moderator. I made sure I emailed 2 guys who I knew were in the room who would be allies. I'm like, I get interrupted. You know, you guys are going to back me up, right? You know, if somebody's going to cut me off, you know. And then I got to the meeting early. I sat in the middle of the room because I'm not going to sit in the side. I'm not. Yeah, you have to get tactical about stuff like that. Now, nobody backs me in the corner, okay? Because I just invested a good portion of my life to prove 12 guys that they're wrong. I can write Deadpool, right?
You know what else I'd say though, Kimmy, is that just keep writing. Keep writing. Find people that you want to work with. Self-publish. Get a following. You know, Instagram. Use social media. You build up a following. Once you can show numbers that you've got a readership. And this is Spike Trotman, to bring her up again. She talks about this in Kickstarter panels. She says Kickstarter's not a launch pad; it's a reward. You know, she was out there doing hardcore social media self-promotion, built a massive following, and so she gets funded on Kickstarter like before you can even blink. So make it so that they're coming to you, not that you're going to them. Build your own audience.
I think too, I want to highlight what Amy said about finding allies. And I'm you know, I just started writing Superb, I guess like a year ago now, and so I'm still trying to kind of learn that aspect of it. Finding allies, male allies that are going to support you, that are, because you're going to need them to bring you along as well. Like you can't just be out here in a vacuum in a bubble. You're going to need everybody to bring you along, and stay persistent, and have people that believe in your work as well, that can kind of speak for you sometimes when you're not there, when you're not behind those closed doors.
I mean, the good news too is that there are a lot more female editors. Editors are the ones who hire. And they're looking for quality, they're looking for people, they're looking for new talent, and they're here. Okay, admittedly they're lurking because they don't want to be, bombarded. But just so you know, that there has been a tremendous shift, just in the time I've been in comics, that there are a lot more women in the business. A lot of women. Like I said, just remember, there's always been women in the industry, but more so than now. There's so many female editors, people who work in the business side, the marketing side, everything. And they're out there, they're up there, and they are. I just took a bunch of Girl Scouts around yesterday. I took 9, which was crazy. I don't know why I volunteered to do that. I felt, and I was so happy. The karma of the entire convention was lifted because people were so welcoming. You know, I took them to 4 different publishers. The female editors came out. They gave them a lesson on how to make comics. These girls who are like, I swear, they're like 10 or 11, were asking, so what are you doing about the body diversity and the art? And how do you feel? I was like, oh my God, who are these girls? There is hope. There is hope, and that's happening. So.
Well, and just to throw this out here, I actually have a book that I'm self-publishing, and it's going to benefit all the families and victims of that Manchester attack that happened back in May at the Ariana Grande concert. It's called Manchester Unbreakable, so if you all want to talk about it.
Oh, that's amazing.
Beautiful.
So you've already mentioned that superhero comics are not the end of comics, and that women have been...
Or the beginning.
From the beginning, it's the...
And that's actually my question, is what was the role of women in comics before 1939 or 1938?
There were cartoonists. There were people like Grace Drayton, who was a cartoonist who also is known for creating the Campbell Soup Kids. Mary Carew, who was Julius Williams' sister, did humorous cartoons, and she's almost completely unknown. If you Google Mary Carew, you probably won't even find stuff by her because she's already been swept onto the ash heap of history.
Nell Brinkley.
Nell Brinkley, Trina Robbins wrote a whole book about Nell Brinkley. But when you get into kind of the comic book era, or even the early comic strip era, they're the colorists. They're there.
Or letterers.
Or letters,
It was
right.
mostly colorists.
Mostly colorists.
You also have to understand the evolution of comics in general. I mean, we really started off with strips. We didn't really get into comics. So you're going to see that the roles change over the years, and the medium changes. And now we're in the era of digital comics. So almost everybody started off in strips back in...
Yeah.
In
We would call them
newspapers.
strips.
Yeah.
Because
Newspaper,
that's the only thing you can read anything on is newspapers. Does anyone even know what newspapers are anymore? But there's a reason. There's a reason behind how these stories are told in like these little strips. As the medium changes, as we get into books and now digital, everything is different. We follow the medium. Oh, now we got too many people. Okay. Yes.
I think a big thing that stands out for me about each one of you is that not only are you women, you're just experts in whatever field that you're in, which is phenomenal. Do you have anyone that was pivotal in the beginning of your career that really, turned it like, I can do this, whether as a female or a black female or Asian or whatever you identify as? You just felt this is my path, no matter what that label is.
I think for me, the more people tell me I can't do this, or I suck at it, or the more kind of sexism I have to deal with in the industry, that's motivation enough for me to say, oh really, I can't do it. Wait till next year when I
Watch
publish
me
this
climb that
awesome
wall.
Right. And just also, you know, meeting the other writers at conventions like this, the other female writers at conventions like this, and when you get knocked down, I think, you know, I've called Amy up like, hey, this happened, like, how should I handle this situation? Learning from people who have been doing it before you, which is why it's important to know the history and the people that have been doing this in the 50s and 60s who are still alive, that can tell you some of the trials and tribulations and the ways to deal with situations as a woman, right? You can't really, you have to deal with them sometimes in a diplomatic way, or bite your tongue sometimes, even when you don't want to, and you know the way someone is treating you is wrong. So I think, you know, your kind of your sister circle in the comics field, using them.
Go ahead.
Oh, I go for the long fight. It's like, I'm not going to stop till I'm ready. You don't tell me no, I can't do it. I have to give credit to my mother. She said, I never want to hear the word can't in your vocabulary. Wow. It's like, okay, I'll figure it out. So, you know, I had really great training at home. So when I went out of the real world, it's like, I've had practice before I really had to tussle. So, you know, when the plagiarism happened, I really couldn't say anything because I did not do my due diligence of being digitally adept. So I said, okay, I have to build a body of work to stand on again, because I have hand lettering work I can stand on. So I had to do the digital work. So what saved me literally was Google. You know what happened, people would Google themselves, they show up. So finally somebody said, my God, you know, check your Google. So I found everything that went to print with my name was a database. So all the trolls, peers, colleagues, and unknown fanboys who were like trying to notch me down and make me disappear. It's like, oh, look, this was my sword. It's like, I'm coming back. Wow. So once I knew that, it's like, okay, let me go to conventions and find out who's there that I've worked with before. And I found people in different places, and they were able to give me opportunity to do digital work. And I found that the recognition was like that. It was like when I did the CMS book, Chiko Musaki, the first issue was picked by New Type magazine, which surveys all manga and anime releases. My book was picked, and the only thing original was my lettering in the translation book. And then another series we worked on, Emma, was chosen by them again. And I thought it was cahoots, DC. It's like, oh yeah, I guess it's a sweetheart deal, but my editor, Ben Abernathy, said, Jim Lee's gonna call you. He's so excited, you know?
Ben was your editor? That's cool.
What?
Ben was your editor?
Yeah, we worked at Dark Horse with the first run of Buffy the Buffy the Vampire series. Vampire Slayer. There's so many series. It's like I'm losing track.
All right, we got 2 minutes.
Oh my
Sorry.
gosh.
Yeah,
Oh,
time
wow.
flew. Do you want to answer quickly?
Just really quickly, I had enormous support from our university librarian, who just got an enormous kick out of the fact that his ancient and medieval history librarian was now also his comics librarian. But I have to really give a shout to Rich Johnson, who used to be a sales guy at DC and then was at Yen Press and now is doing a lot of things. He was on a panel that I was in the audience for, that was kind of a comics for publishers panel. And they talked about the direct market, and they talked about public libraries, and they talked about comic book shops, and they talked about bookstores. And I got up during the Q&A and I said, none of you are talking about academic libraries. You know, we have different needs and requirements than all of these other things. You know, what are you doing for us? And he said, well, let's have dinner. And he literally took me under his wing and just started introducing me to people. And I owe him a huge debt of gratitude for that, because I wasn't part of like this con world. I didn't know how you connected with people. I had just been somebody who read stuff on my own. And suddenly I was kind of thrown into an entirely different role. So I had people who supported me of all kinds, but I think Jim Neal, who was our former university librarian, and Rich Johnson were the two people who really made it work for me.
I am sorry, I have to cut it off. I know there's a lot of questions. I'm happy to answer anything. I'm in B20 at Artist Alley. Do any of you have tables?
I have my book, Encyclopedia of Black Comics, is at booth 1039 at the small press table.
1039, B20. If it's not a question for me, I'm happy to, forward the questions on to. I feel really bad, but we're out of time and there's a lot of angry people outside. So.
Oh, no, thank you.